that we become a population which is unified in our conviction to have mathematically perfected economy, however, we have to understand some other things. There is actually a mathematic prescription derived from these facts which indicate exactly how to transform a system of usury into mathematically perfected economy. Now, people are competing with me now with all their ideas of solution which they can't qualify or justify to us. Jack Schott sent me, some links the other day. Every day I get, reports of further plagiarists of my work. People, that is, who give off some of my ideas, usually not in a correct form, okay, with no credit to the origin of those ideas, and ultimately, very often, to introduce what they contend is a solution without any justification of what the disparities are. You see? Now, obviously, if that's all we're ever going to do, there is never going to be any unity, and we will not, because we don't recognize that there is one solution. We will never unify. If we all put up our own YouTube page and say, oh, this is what's wrong with money, and not give the things that I've given, you see, and then like in the case of Ellen Hodgson Brown, for instance, claim that you could introduce the interest with the principal and then use that to pay taxes. And she actually said this to me in these forums. She said that her solution, which she knows she stole from me, her solution is 1 trillion times more likely to be passed by Congress than mine. Okay? How could that possibly be? I asked her for her math. I said, do you mean to tell me that the banks aren't even going to notice that you're denying them interest? And they're going to allow this to happen? And all these people who are put in government by the largest contributor, which is always the financial system, somehow, are suddenly going to say, yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll introduce the interest into circulation, when anyone who would have developed a solution would have already determined that no way in the world is interest even justified. So why continue charging it, especially if you're going to apply it to taxation and still call it interest, which anyone who solves things doesn't ever confuse terms like that. If it's interest, it's interest. If it's principal, it's principal. Interest is paid to the bank. Taxes are paid to government to fund production. But the other question is, why would you attach this so-called interest as taxation to houses, property, when it isn't even proportional to consumption of the government services that might be rendered or whatever's provided by government? No, the just thing is to pay for those as you consume of them. For instance, we could impose an education tax on your house and charge you interest for it, calling it interest still when it's actually taxation, and that makes a thing that Ellen Hodgson Brown never even figured out herself, and gets to the end of that equation, takes my work and says, oh, but if we just put the interest into circulation with the principal, we'd be all right, and we'll apply that to taxes, and government's going to pass that because the banks put the government into power. Really, I'll let you think whatever you want about that. So, what is the end of all this? I mean, what happens if yet another plagiarist of an original idea come out? Well, we can trace all this back through time, but I'm going to go back because I want to raise one other issue. I've given our first categoric fault of pretended economy, the lie of economy, as inflation and deflation. And I've given one and one only solution of inflation and deflation, that being to maintain a circulation which at all times is equal to the remaining value of represented property, which also, likewise, can only be accomplished by paying out of circulation the principal, which is equivalent to the rate of consumption or depreciation of the property. $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan costs us $1,000 a year, or $83.33 a month, under mathematically perfected economy. We've likewise solved what I like to give as our third categoric fault, that is inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness in proportion to a circulation or remaining capacity to pay. We solve that by eradicating interest, and we can only solve that by eradicating interest because any rate of interest which is profitable to a banking system has to be reborrowed as new debt above the former sum of debt. What a lot of my plagiarists have said, for instance, Stephen Zarlinga, he wrote me years ago, knowing full well I've got people for mathematically perfected economy, and he claims to have authored this book, The Lost Science of Money. In this book, I would assume that he's claiming to have accomplished authoring the solutions which I've advocated for many years. My material has been, available on what we call the internet now. 10 years before there was an official internet, when I provided all this thesis, exhaustively documented to the Reagan administration, complete with computer models which actually calculate the maximum possible lifespan of any pretended economy based on interest-bearing debt, complete with source code to those models so that anyone could examine the algorithms and say, well, that's not how you would figure this out. And to this day, no one has done so. All that has been available since 1983 and 4 on the internet, and I did a book on this in 1979 as well, and I've been talking about it for 10 years before that. And all of a sudden, this guy comes out with a book, The Lost Science of Money, he calls it. And guess what his solution is? A reduction of interest rates to about 4 or 5% in what he called the Chicago Plan, which wasn't either of his own authoring. He borrowed it from the Great Depression. Okay? Well, guess what? It's happened since then, and it hasn't saved us from failure. Interest rates have been reduced below 4 or 5%. Well, when Mr. Zarlinga first contacted me, he wrote me more or less like this. He said, we're of like mind, and therefore, I've just released my new book, The Lost Science of Money, and I would hope that you would be interested in helping me promote it. And I'm thinking, what? This guy's probably plagiarized my work. All of a sudden, here in the midst of failure, he comes up with a book of why we're going to fail, and I've been saying this for 30 years before him, and now he's going to resurrect The Lost Science of Money? So I said to myself, well, I wrote him back a polite letter. I asked him how he resurrected The Lost Science of Money, and why, if he understood that we are of like mind, he might have differed in any respect, either from my identification of cause or solution. And you know what? He never wrote me back again. Well, now, the end of our story isn't here, and this is why this plagiarism thing isn't about me. It's really about you. What happened? Many times, but let's just go back a while back. After talking to this fellow Andrew in 2008 of the Ron Paul campaign, I was frankly, I was kind of pissed off. These people are pathetic. And my issue was escalated at the Ron Paul campaign. They kind of pissed me off because they didn't even provide any way for me to jump around this guy and say, if you're running for president, you're going to claim that you're going to end the Fed, but you're going to preserve banking, and that preserves the very process which is terminal. And you don't even talk about an actual solution for inflation and deflation. You claim, without explaining how, that gold is going to accomplish this. I'm sorry. I am a citizen of the United States, and I demand an explanation. I'm holding you accountable, and we should all be doing this. We should all be holding these people accountable. You should be holding me accountable. If I leave a hole in my argument, you should nail me for it. Because after all, what am I doing? Standing up here wasting your time, not even being able to justify the facts that I'm claiming are facts. You know, I have no business doing that, and you know it, and I know it. So, anyway, my Ron Paul complaint to the Paul campaign, it turns into a complaint in the midst of this discussion. I forget the name of this lawyer, but they had a form on their web pages. It was the only thing that I could find. You know, and I've called, Ron Paul's, offices in Washington, D.C. and Texas for, we're talking 20 years, So I only found this one form to their lawyer, and I didn't pull my punches. I posted in a brief, few paragraphs, all that would fit in the form. My complaint, my idea that the Paul campaign Paul is just a pretender. These are the faults in his arguments, and I want an explanation. I want to know why it is people are telling me that I need to contact Ron Paul when he won't even respond to me, and his people are telling me there's no such thing as mathematically perfected economy, and everyone should know that. Well, why would you say such a thing if you're running for President of the United States, pretending that you represent solution? You mean there's no way to prove it mathematically? Well, in fact, if you study the work of the Austrian economists, so-called, you will find that they uniformly dispute the applicability of mathematics. Although you can calculate the maximum possible lifespan of any economy based on interest-bearing debt by simply the very same calculations that a bank uses to determine your next month's interest, suddenly when you get into Austrian economy, you can't do that. They deny the applicability of mathematics for identification of cause, proof of cause, modeling of cause, proof of solution, etc. And it's just preposterous. So this is the kind of person that's running for president in opposition to mathematically perfected economy. I'm asserting the fact that you should only pay your principal and that it should be retired from circulation. It is not the property of banks, and Ron Paul is not only an advocate of banks and interest, but an advocate of higher rates of interest, saying without justification that the higher rates of interest would have prevented us from borrowing our way into the debt we are in, while in order to maintain a vital circulation so that we can continue servicing the debts we have, we could have only borrowed further. You see, it's mathematically impossible for him to be correct. So anyway, what happened when I posted this reply back to this lawyer for the Paul campaign is suddenly my telephone rang. Suddenly, I get my first and my only contact from the actual Ron Paul campaign ever, okay? And this fellow on that phone is begging me not to take this fellow Andrew's position as the official position of the Ron Paul campaign. He assures me that he put it this way, which is preposterous, that he had recently graduated from a famous economic school. He didn't even say what the school was, and that's the exact terms he put it in it. A famous economic school. And he'd visited my web pages. He was very impressed by them, and to trust that the Ron Paul campaign would eagerly watch my web pages, and whatever they were going to do, he didn't even say. But of course, I never hear from him again. So what is the integrity of this campaign for president on the behalf of Ron Paul, and how can it possibly serve us? We deserve to know, and we should settle for nothing less than an absolute answer. Why? Because all of us should realize already in this one discussion that there is one and one only solution for inflation and deflation, and there is likewise one and one only solution for inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness to a bank we don't even owe this money to, because all they do is publish the evidence of our promissory obligations to each other.